So hello, thank you so much for coming to my talk today. I'm Zach, and just before we get into the talk proper, I'm going to do a little bit of an itinerary. So there's housekeeping, which amazingly is occurring right now. So after that, we'll do the talk itself. I've pre-recorded this talk, which means if you've got any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, write them down, deliver them, ask them at the end, but I won't be able to stop the video to take your questions as I normally would if I was actually delivering it live. That's pretty much it. So the talk will say a little bit more about me, and I will share my screen and just kick off properly. Right, got to work out how to use technology now. Okay. All right, here we go. Just mute myself as well. Hi, I'm Zach, and welcome to the 2020 special edition online version of First Steps as a DevOps Engineer. Before I begin, I'd like to say that this talk is going to be based on my experiences on a particular project, so it's not going to be too technical. I'm going to talk about 7 lessons that I learned on the project, but before I begin, let's talk about me. So I am a test engineer at ScottLogic, a software consultancy, and I've been fortunate enough to work on a few projects there across a few roles as well. On one of those in particular, actually one of my earlier ones at ScottLogic, I was working as part of quite a large team of like 24 plus people building a mobile banking app. And actually, we were making an Android app and an iOS app side by side, so it's a really big operation. I started out as a test engineer on the project, but somehow found myself in a new role as a DevOps engineer. That's a bit of a nebulous title, so I'll explain what it meant to me. I was tasked with supporting the development team, and I did this by working on a few different software systems. One of those, for example, was CI/CD pipelines. We needed to have the development team working really efficiently at high quality and automatically deploying the app into the hands of stakeholders, so we had that. We also maintained some stub API environments, like stubs of the client's development environments, because the actual environments left a lot to be desired sometimes. I also had to firefight to fix these systems, keep them maintained, and also communicate all of this to the team to ensure that they knew what was going on. After several months of the project, it went on for quite a while. It ended, of course, and we handed over the development to the client. I had a bit of time after that to reflect on what I'd learned. I came up with these 7 lessons. I've shortened them to 6 to keep this a bit more brief because it's online, and I'm going to share them with you now. Lesson 1. Don't go for gold. So, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things I was working on was CI pipelines, and we needed to build up an Android CI pipeline to keep the team efficient. We didn't inherit one because we were starting the project from scratch. And so we came up with, at first, a gold-plated, gold standard solution for our CI pipelines. And we could have implemented that first, but we didn't. I'm going to talk about why. Our pipeline needed to do a few things. We needed to lint the code for the app. We needed to, of course, build the app itself. We had some testing to do, so we had unit tests to run, and we had more complicated instrumented on-device tests to run. Finally, if all that passed, we wanted to deploy the app to the Play Store just to stakeholders to keep them in the loop with the app. That was all fine, but there were actually a few more requirements in our gold standard solution. The pipelines needed to be fast. The whole point of continuous integration pipelines is that they're quick, so you can keep working rapidly. They needed to be reproducible, so if the code doesn't change, the result of the pipeline shouldn't change. We needed some level of concurrency, maybe 5 or 6 pipelines running at once, and they shouldn't be fighting over compute resources. They should just be running really nicely independently of each other. So how hard can that be? We chose to use containers as one of the ways to fulfill the gold standard goals of our pipeline. To run with containers, we needed a Docker image, and this image had to be set up to build with the Android environment in it. So that was a little bit of work, but fine, we could do that. Of course, this is the gold standard solution, so this Docker image needs to be deployed properly to a Docker registry, an image registry, and that requires continuous deployment. So that requires authenticating between the pipelines and the registry. A little bit more work, And this has already taken up time, and there would be no complete running pipeline for the team to use at this point. So if we want to run this pipeline somewhere, well, we chose Kubernetes for this because it would be scalable. We could save a little money on our builds by using some of our auto-scaling features. It'd be pretty sweet, but it requires a Google Kubernetes engine configuration because we were going with the Google Cloud Platform. That's a little bit of effort. We had to integrate between Kubernetes and GitLab. And of course, the documentation for that was beautiful. There were authentication issues involving a service account, registration tokens. It was nightmarish for me, I have to say. And at that point, we had more work to do as well. There was node pool auto-scaling to think about. There was configuration fine-tuning, because with Kubernetes, problems evolve over time. Things aren't necessarily determinable from your configuration up front. Finally, we had a pipeline, but it wouldn't do any deployments. So there's more work to be done there to achieve our wonderful gold standard solution. So for deployments, we need a signing configuration for our app. Okay, that requires signing keys. What's the deal with signing keys, you may ask? Well, on Android, you've got to store these securely, because if you lose your signing keys for the Play Store, you'll never be able to update your app ever again. So maybe that was something we wanted to take a little bit seriously. We had to have a Play Store configuration, which takes more time than you might think to get set up. And finally, at that point, we would have had our gold standard, beautiful pipeline, but we would have blocked the team for a very long time getting that configured. Instead of going for the gold standard solution immediately, we decided to find a minimum viable pipeline, if you will, something that worked well, it built the app, it ran some of the tests, and we could spin that up really quickly to get the team hitting the ground running and not being blocked by us for ages. So that's my lesson here. Gold standard solutions are amazing, but sometimes to start off with, it's best to iterate and work your way towards them. Lesson 2, wrong is right. So if we think back to the CI pipeline for the Android app, one of the things we needed to do was run instrumented on-device tests. For this, we chose Firebase Test Lab, which is Google's cloud device farm offering. To authenticate automatically between our pipelines and Firebase Test Lab, we needed to use something called a service account, which is like a robot user, not associated with a human, but associated with our pipelines. We needed to give this service account permissions, of course, to run our Firebase tests. As per the Google documentation at the time, we were required to give the service account a particular role, the editor role. You might think that editor is just editor of the Firebase Test Lab, but it was a little bit more than that. It was actually editor of everything on Firebase and more, because it was also editor of our entire Google Cloud Platform project. So our buckets, our Kubernetes cluster, everything in our Google Cloud Platform estate, this meager service account just meant for running tests, had complete access to. It had got a little too big for its boots, and we had introduced a vulnerability. What may seem like a bit of a questionable decision was one based in pragmatism. We needed to keep the team moving, so we needed Firebase Test Lab in our pipelines. We noted down the issue, and we fixed it later on, once we had some time and once we'd unblocked the team. There can be other reasons, though, to make these kind of questionable decisions. They can come from business pressure, whether it's internal or it's from a client, but that can lead to a bit of a hacky mindset. So when we took this decision, we made sure we fixed it later. So when I say wrong is right, it can be right dependent on the context. Lesson 3, you can't do it all. During the project, I became aware of a tool called Terraform that lets you write, plan, and create infrastructure as code. Infrastructure as code is for cloud platforms where instead of having to configure your infrastructure, maybe a VM or a bucket, by going through the console, the GUI, and just clicking about, you can write it all as version-controlled code. So we needed to use this when, at last minute, a security requirement was imposed on us by the client, whereby all of our GitLab runner traffic needed to be routed through a NAT gateway. We used Terraform, and it worked beautifully to spin up the NAT gateway, and the problem was resolved. But I started thinking, what else could I Terraform? Well, I could Terraform our Kubernetes cluster for our runners. I could get all of the GCP IAMs in there. Really, I could have everything terraformed. And I thought, I could become the Terraform man. I could terraform everything, and I would sit upon a throne in my kingdom of Terraform, and all would be wonderful. It was at this point that I had to take a step back, really was asked to take a step back by my lead on the project. I had to consider, what are the benefits of becoming the Terraform man and terraforming everything? Well, we'd have beautiful infrastructure as code that would make handing over all of our infrastructure to the client easier at the end. And I get to learn a new tool. But what would be the costs of this? Well, I'd have to learn a new tool. And that would be an absolutely enormous time sink that would have taken my resources away from all the other needs that existed on the project. So I hadn't stopped to consider the broader requirements of my role on the project, aside from terraforming everything. At the time, when I was told that I wouldn't become the Terraform man, I was devastated, and it looked like this. But I got myself together, finished the project, and something happened. Eventually, I moved on to another project. I was able to become the Terraform man. My dream was realized, and this is what it looked like. So maybe I should have been a little bit more careful about what I wished for. Lesson 4, firefighting is real, and solutions can be obvious. To explain this one, I'm going to tell a little story that I've dubbed the curious case of the pending pipelines. Once upon a time, 2 years ago, it was a Friday afternoon on the project, and I decided to work from home. Back when, not in 2020, this was perhaps a little bit of a luxury for me. So I got home, everything was wonderful. I was ready to have a relaxed time, doing some work, of course. And I opened my laptop, sat down at my chair, and I see a message from one of my colleagues. Hi, Zach, how are you? Just a quick thing. All of the pipelines have stopped working and the merge requests are piling up and we can't really do any work. So maybe can you fix this for us, please? We really need you to fix this. Everything's broken and we can't do any work. We don't know what to do. So obviously at seeing this, naturally, I am freaking out, to be honest. So I'm like, I have to fix this. Where do we begin? I take a look at GitLab. I start scrolling through the pages of pipelines. Of course, everything's not working. People can't work. So I'm thinking, is it something in the CI settings in GitLab? I look through the settings. I can't see anything wrong there. I'm like, one step further, is it Kubernetes? Because Kubernetes with GitLab can get a bit complex. I'm looking through Kubernetes. I'm seeing nothing wrong. I'm really freaking out at this point. I've got no idea what the problem is. And finally, I get a little message through from one of my colleagues, Chris. Zach, the Mac Minis on your desk, coordinating these jobs, were asleep. A simple solution. At some point, when I'd reinstalled the Macs, I've forgotten to untick the box that tells them to just go to sleep when they feel like it. In the heat of the moment and the stress, I had reached for the most complicated solutions to the problems when actually it had been something super simple all along. Lesson 5, be data-driven. Of course, we're going back to the pipelines for this one. So we ran loads of pipelines a day, and jobs in those pipelines could fail for many reasons. There could be spontaneous failures, maybe the network dropped out. There could be latent issues that only come into play over time. Sometimes there were outstanding issues, things we just had chosen not to fix. And then there were the odd occasions where we accidentally broke something. When jobs failed, for whatever reason, I'd need to do a few things for the team. Firstly, I'd need to understand the problem. How often was the failure occurring? Why was it occurring? And was it really affecting the team? I'd need to prioritize it against my own backlog of work, in a broad sense, but also against other CI issues. And then I'd need to take a decision. Would I resolve it then and there, or would I defer it? Or would I just choose to not do anything and let the team live with it? Whatever the case, I needed to communicate and reassure the team that I understood the nature of the problem and that they understood why I'd chosen to act or to not act. But how hard can that be, I ask? Well, we ran, as I said, several jobs a day. Several's not data-driven. We ran in the region of almost 200 jobs a day because we were such a large team. To do all those things, the understanding, the prioritizing, the reassuring, and the potentially resolving at that scale, that would be quite tricky, especially if to gather the information, you had to scroll through the GitLab pipeline pages and keep all of that information in your head. I know I certainly couldn't do that. So I thought there had to be a better way. Fortunately, there was, because of course, we live in the age of technology. When there's technology, there's probably an API. And GitLab has a fantastic web API, and that includes information about pipeline jobs. And when there's an API, you can scrape it. So I wrote some scripts that scraped all of the pipeline data, chucked it into Google Sheets so we could analyze and plot all sorts of interesting information about the pipeline jobs. We could see things like what's the average duration of a pipeline, the average duration of a successful job, how often do platform errors in general occur, but have we seen a particular error occur before? And when we try to fix a problem, have we actually fixed it? What's the efficacy of our intervention in the pipeline? Being data-driven meant I could work at scale on the pipelines, and I could be really confident in the decisions I was taking. I had really awesome charts and data analyses to back up the things that I was saying, and it felt great. Lesson 6, saying no. This is my final lesson, and it's also a bit of a more personal one for me. During the course of the project, I had to strike a balance between improving things and firefighting when stuff went wrong, and between being as helpful as possible to those on the team around me and focusing on my own work. And to be honest, I found that quite difficult, especially being quite new. I don't think I really had the confidence to just say no to people and say, I'm focusing on what I need to do right now. And I learned that, of course, I could just say no, but there were some ways to do it in a way that was more helpful to everyone else as well. So I could say no, and here's why, but I could go a step further and say, no, here's why, and here's where your issue is on a kind of backlog of my work. Here's why I can't do it, because I have these other things, and this is the context that I'm working in. And that worked really well for a lot of people. There were some opportunities, though, when I could say a little bit of do it yourself. People will come to me frequently asking me for information that they perhaps could have found quickly, but of course, I had access to the information a bit more readily. I was working in a context that they might not have been, so it's fair enough that they needed to ask me for it. But I could write little guides that meant they didn't have to ask me because they felt empowered and knew how to get access to things themselves. To sum it up, if you give a developer a fish, you'll feed them for a day. But if you teach a developer how to fish, they will never ask you for the URL of the stub server ever again. And that was quite nice. So that's my lesson. It's okay to put yourself first. Just say no sometimes. Thank you so much for listening to my talk. Those have been the 6 lessons that I learned during the project. I hope you found them interesting and informative. And that's it. Thank you.
Hello, I really hope that worked. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you for watching that. If you've got any questions, yeah, feel free to put them in the chat now. I'll hang around to answer them. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, so the question from Robert is, did I have much responsibility for the project? And I mentioned a team lead. Yeah, so there were several kind of leads on the project. We had delivery managers, we had across the iOS and Android teams, we had technical leads. I had my own technical lead on the project. So ultimately, I think responsibility in the broad sense obviously didn't fall on me, but even responsibility in my area wasn't entirely on me. I think there was my technical lead above me who could take a lot of responsibility for things, which was quite nice, especially as I was quite new at the time. So I definitely wasn't on my own out there. But the next question, how did you learn the new skills and tech to keep up with the project needs? Ooh, interesting. A lot of it was just reading up at the time. I think, to be fair, I I've kind of had experience in the past with not necessarily entirely some of the cloud stuff, but general, yeah, I think it was just a case of being able to learn. And I think a lot of it was the fact that I was in a very supportive environment. The team was very supportive. So I was just able to take the time and upskill myself, really. I think I'm a quick learner. Yeah. Any more questions? No? Okay. Ooh. What was the project timeline? Ooh, so I came on a little late, but it was pretty much. I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to remember. I'm going to say 6 to 8 months from probably when I came on. We would work in 2-week sprints. We'd have demos. At the end of each sprint, we've got quite good stakeholder engagement with that. And after quite a few months of working, I think the kind of thing happened where the clients, there were a lot of pressures internally at the client, which meant we ended up handing the delivery over to them rather than seeing the whole thing through. But yeah, so it was about eight months of work. And it went pretty successfully in the end. Subject of saying no. How did I ring fence my time in the face of stakeholders asking you to jump on X and Y without disappointing them? I think for me, when it came to that kind of stakeholder engagement, I think I was shielded a little bit from that personally. So a lot of the time, it wasn't necessarily stakeholders coming to me with asking for this thing and me having to say, I'm doing this. I think it came from more internally within our own team, especially when things kind of broke. And how did I ring fence my time? I think a lot. Just having a clear backlog of work that I went through frequently, that I prioritized frequently, and taking time to step back and maintain that perspective really helped. Whereas if I hadn't had a backlog of work and I would just jump on things as people gave them to me, that I think it would have fallen apart and I wouldn't have been able to manage my time effectively. So I think focusing on my backlog and maintaining a backlog of work really helped. And I think that, yeah, as I said, the kind of stakeholders were kind of managed a bit outside of me, which meant without disappointing them, that was not managed by me. Oh, you're welcome. Any more questions? I'm going to keep asking that. Don't have to keep them more. So the only person that had done similar work within the team, I would say, was my lead, and they were working with me on a lot of the pipeline stuff, but they had a very large remit across a wide range of areas in the app. So thinking about the client's environments, test strategies, security, implementation, they had a very wide remit. So they couldn't necessarily focus all their time on the things that I was doing. So yeah, I was one of the few people, or possibly, if not one of the only people in the team that could do the work I was on, which was kind of a little bit of a pressurizing situation. But I think, again, as I've said, everyone on the team was very supportive and very nice, so it worked out. Cool. Well, yeah, if no one has any more questions, I think that is it. So again, thank you very much, everyone, for choosing to listen to this talk. If you've got more questions, feel free to message me. Yeah, thanks. Oh.